entire life is what we call typical development. I hate that they call it typical because I think not very many people have that actual opportunity, but for the sake of argument, it is typical. So for those particular students that have that typical background, if you look at that pyramid, there's a very large chunk that's dedicated to cognition. That means that child is able to learn and process and grow in their academics because they can focus more on that. If you notice underneath cognition, social emotional pieces are almost equally as thick and large, which means I can develop my social emotional coping skills. I can understand my feelings. I can understand when I feel anxious, how can I monitor my behavior to help it, to calm myself down. All of those are social emotional aspects. I feel empathy when my friend is hurt, or when I might say something wrong and my friend gets upset. I understand that I wasn't empathetic. All of that is a development in that social emotional processing. And so these typical development students can work equally in cognition and social emotional areas. Regulation, regulating my behaviors. Also a big chunk that they are able to do and spend time in. Super critical to healthy adult development and healthy child development. And look at the very bottom of that triangle. You see survival. That child, a child from a typical development with a well-concentrated network, does not have to spend very much time in survival. When we talk about survival, you'll see there at the top the reptilian brain. That's your fight, flight, or freeze response. That student or person is not put in many situations where they're having to depend on their survival to get through the day. Now, do traumatic things happen? And absolutely, that reptilian brain must kick in. Their survival mechanisms must kick in. And that's why there's a small slither there for that, to acknowledge that it is possible and it sometimes happens. So now let's look at developmental trauma. And developmental trauma is, I didn't have all of those networks and supports as I was going through as a child growing up. I may have had a couple of people in my life, but they kind of fell in and out. I may have been hungry constantly. I may have had sporadic moments of love and support, but I did not have any kind of consistent typical development. So if we look at the pyramid of what's happening in that student that has not had, I would say, a more atypical development, look at the largest piece. We started with the largest piece on typical development. So now I'm going to start with the largest piece on developmental trauma. The largest piece, or one of the largest pieces, is that survival. That means I am spending more time in survival each and every day. I am living in fight, flight, or freeze almost every minute of the day. And what that looks like is when we are engaging with a student and they snap back or they blow up. That child more than likely is living in survival. And that should be a cue as educators to look a little bit deeper, to coordinate with your counselor, to ask more questions because something's going on and we can help that student. They spend more time too in regulation, so they do recognize some of their emotions and the consequences, but because fight, or flight kind of overtakes the brain, they may be moving towards regulation, and then that survival kicks in and it's like, and we've moved, and now I have to, fight, flight, or freeze. They're growing in that social emotional, but it's not always positive necessarily. It is, sometimes I'm learning that in order to appease what I'm feeling, I can turn to drugs, alcohol. I'm going to leave my situation because I want to go find a better situation or a different situation. But the most critical piece of this pyramid is the very tip. The tiniest part of this student from developmental trauma is cognition. And we sit here and we wonder, why can't these kids learn? Look at look at all of the energy their body is exerting in all of these other areas This is all that's left for them to academically process and move forward. And that's why we say so often in the mental health world that we have to focus on the social emotional learning of all students if we want to make those changes towards the academics. They go hand in hand. We cannot reach for academics without addressing those very basic layers. And your EL and immigrant students carry even more layers of disparity. So I just talked about all students, but this is all students plus when we're talking about ELs and immigrant students. So something to think about how much a child is bringing with them every time they make it to school. So some truths about trauma. Trauma is real. I know that there are still people that believe, oh, you'll get over that. Just dust yourself off and move on. I had a father, I have a father, I love him, but I have a father that is very much like that, or he was like that. And that can be very harming to students. We as educators cannot have that stance. We have to believe and recognize that trauma is real, even if we can't see it. Trauma is extremely prevalent. And now with COVID-19, I am saying 100% of people are having a traumatic response to the COVID-19 consequences. There is so much happening with people losing their jobs, losing their safety, deaths. There's so much more that really trauma is going to be in all of us as we return to the brick and mortar campus, if that's what happens here in the near future. It's very toxic to the brain. We all need to be prepared to deal with students who've experienced trauma. We don't have to know what that trauma is, though. That was one of the biggest complaints teachers always told me is, well, if I would have known, I would have approached that differently. But we're thinking about it wrong. You don't have to know. This is the only time where I will say we should make the assumption that everyone has trauma, and we should treat them as we would if we knew their story. We should be loving students and supporting them and being empathetic and not just giving leniency if we know they're going through something rough. Okay, that's a mindset change. And even though children are resilient, we hear that all the time. That is true. There's no doubt in my mind that children are resilient. But look at that second piece, within a positive learning environment. If we negate the positive learning environment piece, our children are not resilient and will not be able to bounce back. So another layer of disparity that our EL and immigrant students face is the impact of immigration, on students. Students are now, given our political climate, there is an increased fear of deportation, revealing information to the school. There is a generalized fear that is living within the EL and immigrant community. And unfortunately, we have to try to best support them going through this with them. This was a study that I looked at, and they talked about, our immigrant students that were arriving at school that were crying, withdrawn, refusing to eat lunch because they had witnessed the deportation of a family member. That is an extremely traumatic event to see your loved one, to witness it, and you don't even have to witness it, but to have that experience happen where a loved one is taken away, and now you've lost your network, you've lost your connection. And so absolutely, students are going to respond with cognitive challenges, behavioral challenges, emotional challenges, and further down I've got a couple of slides where we'll talk about that a little bit deeper. But this truly can impact a student's ability to learn. And what we don't see and what they don't tell you is that they have these fears that are embedding within them every time they go to school. And so we have to, again, think from the mindset that potentially all of these families could be experiencing this. All of these students could be having this fear. There are students that quite don't understand how it all works and how deportation works and how that system works. And so, they're scared because they don't know and they don't understand. And sometimes the language we use is a little too high for them to really understand. So making our environment safe is super critical for that. Building connections with your students. Relational capacity, I say it in almost every training I give, relational capacity is the #1 indicator of student success. Build relationships. I know some of you are going to be new teachers, new bilingual ed teachers, and you're still trying to figure out how this works. Some of you have been in the game for a while, but relationships matter. And that is the biggest component that you can address that doesn't take any extra reading. It doesn't take any extra skills. It just means that you are connecting with students. That connection will drive them to tell you things that you need to know to even better support them. But if they don't trust you, they won't tell you, and we can't help them. Some of the students are assuming that they're going to be deported anyway and started to talk about how there's really no point to coming to school anymore. It's a lot of lost potential. This is what our students are thinking. Why should I bother? I've worked a lot with DACA, both in the counseling setting and as a teacher and facilitator. And this was a conversation I had often with students and families. Families would ask me, please talk to my kid. Please let them know that this isn't the end of the world, that we will work through this and everything's gonna be okay. But we lost so many students. They disengaged from the education setting because they're like, what's the point? Nobody's gonna help me. I have no future. And so all of this stuff impacts our students. And even though there's no real solution for DACA quite yet, we have to maintain that hope that this is going to be worked out and everything's going to be okay, regardless of what the outcome is. We have to remain positive. Our students need that positivity to have the hope to keep going. Once they lose the hope, they become hopeless, and the disengagement, we may not come back from it. So how can we be, culturally sensitive in trauma-informed care? So again, this is specifically for our, addressing that culture piece that plays deeply into our EL and immigrant populations. And so there is a technique or a strategy that we call DEF. And so what the D stands for is reduce distress. Okay, we have to try to clean away everything, all the fears, all of the concerns, all of the layers within them to help them refocus on what we're learning and what we're doing. But we have to ask them about what their fears and worries are. I have found in my career, so many educators and counselors never ask the question, how can I help you? What is making you worried? Why are you fearful? We don't ask. I'm not sure why. I think we have an assumption. I think sometimes, when we've got 25 little faces looking at us, it's difficult to spend that time. Please hear me clearly though. I am not asking any educator on this webinar today to be a counselor. I am not asking you to provide therapy or go deep with our students. I'm asking you to get to know them and build relationships and to recognize when they are in distress and start that dialogue. Because once you hear something and you're inside your head, you're like, oh, that's a little bit more than what I'm prepared to support, that's when you can start saying, I'm going to get other resource people to help us with this situation. There are people, excuse me, in your school or in your community that can help support. You are not charged with doing this all alone. E, emotional support. Who and what does, we use the term patient, but it obviously student, who and what does the student need now? Where are they? Are they in a fit of rage? Are they in a breakdown, crying situation? When we are in these high emotional stages, whether it's a screaming, kicking, crying kind of fit, I think fit is kind of the best word to describe that, we need to act immediately. And you as an educator, as a teacher, are not expected to provide that triage. This is, let me get a counselor involved. Sometimes if it's a violent act, which happens very often, I used to deal with some students that would throw chairs and things like that. We need to remove the students from the classroom, and we need to bring in reinforcement to support us. But that is a triage. That's an immediate 911. We need to do something about this now. And then F, remember the family. Gauge family stressors and resources. So many times we want to fix these issues, or we make assumptions, and we never stop to ask the family. I used to get teachers all the time say, you know, this student looks dirty. Should I put in a CPS report? And I would say, have you talked to the family yet? And many times it was no. And so I would call the family and I would find out that the washer and dryer broke, or that there was a job loss, or there's no detergent. I would find out what the core issue was and give a solution. We had washer and dryer in the nurse's office and in the gyms. And so many times it was, all right, let me help you as you all are navigating this system. Through those conversations, I would then find out that, you know, due to a job loss, there's concerns about, you know, paying rent and food and all of those things. So here's the community resources to support you. Again, teachers, I'm not asking you to know that interconnected network. I'm asking you to get people who do know involved enough to support and help these families. That's being culturally sensitive, doing D, E, and F. And I am sorry, I'm not watching the chat, but I will address questions as soon as I get a little further through. I want to make sure I get through all the content, and then I will. It's just a little much for me to look at kind of all the places, so we'll save questions for the end. But keep dropping them or putting stories, and I will address them as we go. Understanding perceptions of traumatic stress. So this again goes back to the lens, the cultural lens that our families approach with understanding trauma and stress. It is still extremely taboo in many cultures to even acknowledge mental health issues. We have some cultures that prefer to say that, well, if these bad things are happening, it's a punishment. There must be something that we've done wrong, and God essentially is punishing us for those actions. Because there are these very rigid cultural beliefs with mental health, families, especially our EL and immigrant families who hold very deep cultural beliefs in mental health, are sometimes resistant to getting their child support. Because they don't want to look bad in their community. They don't want anyone to think their child is crazy. Those of you on the line, none of us want to believe that our kids are crazy. You know, that's scary. But we have to recognize where they're coming from, what their lens is, and work to meet them in the middle. Help them know this is about supporting your child so that they can be successful long-term. We want your child to be able to work through this. We don't believe your child is crazy. None of us, not even I, am qualified to say your child is crazy. But we throw that term around so loosely, it really has gotten this very, very negative connotation. And so we need to be careful with the language that we're using. We don't know what is going on necessarily with that child. Sometimes it's also about patterns of behavior. When I reflect on my time as a bilingual teacher, I used to notice that a couple of students would have some misbehavior around 10:30 or 11 a.m. They were really great. And then about that time, they kind of got real restless, and you know, we would go to lunch at noon, and the afternoon was beautiful. And so I kept wondering, you know, again, I was a really young teacher and I didn't quite know all of these things. I'm like, what is going on? I don't understand why, you know, from this time to this time, is it the subject matter? You know, I thought about, should I move my subjects around so that if that is causing problems, you know, we can divert that in another direction. But eventually I figured it out. These kids were hungry. A couple of these kids did not get breakfast. They were some of the ones that were constantly late. And so by the time we hit that 10:30 time frame, think about us. What happens to us when we don't eat and we're hungry? I turn into the hungry monster. I get hangry. I'm not gonna lie. I have made some very poor choices from not eating, and then I get hangry and take it out on others. The same thing happens to our kids. And so from that point on, I learned about the importance of having snacks available. And y'all, yes, snack time is something that's very popular. But what else do we know? Not all kids can afford snacks. If they can't afford to eat at home, much less have a snack to bring. And so I worked through our food service department. Y'all, your food service department is incredible. They have access to a lot of resources. Sometimes there's a little bit of paperwork that you have to do, but they get snacks at a fraction of the cost. And so I was able to work with them to build in some snacks through their programs. And then eventually grants kicked in and we didn't have to pay them. And eventually everyone started to get it, and they're very popular. But talk to your cafeteria manager, find out what is the cost for providing a snack. Something as simple as a snack can make a huge difference in our students. But if they are hungry, they cannot learn, they cannot focus. When we are hungry, we cannot learn, we cannot focus. And so keep in mind, misbehavior isn't always because a child wants to be bad. I have rarely in my career seen a child that truly wants to be bad. What I have seen is a manifestation of behaviors due to stress, anxiety, fear, hunger, and a lack of basic resources. This goes just a little bit more into cultural competence. I know that as bilingual teachers, you all study this in your pedagogy, in your teacher prep program, and you recognize that it's important to be aware of culture. It's important to implement texts and resources about all of the beautiful cultures that come into your classroom and around the world. And so this is just a reminder that the way that we can be competent and express competence is by acknowledging that and making sure that we are providing a variety of text, resources, and opportunities for kids to see people like them that are successful. We always see the what are they called, career days and things like that. But for my bilingual classes, specifically, I always ensured that I had a diverse representation, really for all classes, but especially for my bilingual ed classes. When I was a counselor, I wanted them to see people that looked like them or people that looked different and represented the globe a little bit more diverse. Because students have to believe and have that hope. Remember, I talked about hope is very, very critical to want to achieve and grow and work past the difficult experiences that they are going through. Life is not going to be simple for them, but that's okay because we can learn and grow from it and still get out and be successful on the other end. But that's a really hard concept to connect with a lot of students of all ages because we live in the here and now. We stay in this misery instead of thinking about the future. And that's normal. Again, that goes back to that prefrontal cortex not yet developed, that we can't see the positive stimuli down the road if we're focusing on right now. And so with time and continuous support and having teachers and educators that are giving the same consistent message each year as they move up in their program will help them build that knowledge and see and drive in the direction of that hope and positivity. Traumatic separations. So what's very common and what I saw in my career as a bilingual ed and what I've consulted on since then is that many times families may send their kids first to the country and work on trying to afford a way for them to come over, but they send the kids first and they tend to live with another family member. If grandma's here, if sister's here, if cousin is here, they join that group. And so there becomes this traumatic type separation. And so when you're talking with families, it's good to know, am I talking to the mother, like Or am I talking to an aunt that's acting as the mother? Big difference, because that will clue you into why we're seeing some of these behaviors. It will clue that family member into why they are seeing some behaviors on their side. Trust me, if we're seeing the behaviors in school, more than likely we're seeing them at home. And so this kind of gives you an idea. I really love this list. So as you're working and talking with parents or the guardians or whoever's coming to have that communication with you, these tell you kind of the things that they could be doing. So you're listening for, the kid seems withdrawn, having aggression, trouble sleeping. You're hearing those things and connecting the dots and thinking, hey, well, tell me a little bit more, about this student. And just get more details. You are not a PI, you are not an investigator, but the more you know, the better we can support. But that takes trust building with not just the children, but also the parents or the guardians. So I'm going to talk a little bit about strengths-based theory and how we use that in working with our EL and immigrant populations. So I'm just going to read you a little scenario here. Javier is a 7th grade student who joined our class after being out of school for 6 months. He is an English learner whose home language is Spanish. Prior to enrolling in our school, he had recently moved across the country and was in transition, living in homeless shelters with his large family. At first, Javier answered questions very quietly, and his eyes often looked toward the floor or quickly around the room. Also, he often got out of his seat without permission and walked in a small circle near his desk. Okay, so when we apply strengths-based theory, we are looking for the positives, the strengths in any scenario, in any student. So if I'm looking at Javier and I'm hearing this story, automatically it is natural for us to be like, oh boy, man, he's been out of school. There's going to be so many deficits there. He has no background in English. That's going to be a challenge. He's getting around and acting out without permission. We kind of naturally lean towards pessimistic views. We have to wipe that. We have to come from that strengths-based theory, and that means having a mindset that's a little bit different. And so when I look at this and I think of this like in the strengths-based theory concept, I think, wow, I'm so glad this kid came to school today. We have to celebrate the smallest things, and sometimes making it to school is the biggest thing that kid has done. Despite everything that's going on, he has made it to school. Thank you, Javier, for coming to school today. I am so glad to see you. Every day should be a celebration. When I look at this again, I see he's out of his seat without permission and walked in a small circle near his desk. What I didn't see is that he's interrupting other students' learning, that he's bothering other students. So a strength would be he is dealing with whatever it is by himself and not intruding on the learning of other students. You have to make your brain think a little bit differently to find the positives. His eyes often look toward the floor or quickly around the room. That is sometimes a cultural piece. People, in the Western culture, want to say things like, look me in the eye. And many of our students, a sign of respect is not to look you in the eye. So, this is possibly him showing respect to the teacher. Again, thinking from a strengths-based theory. And so I'm going to give you, so I love this. This is really moving from what is lacking to what is already there. And this gives you a little bit more of that strengths-based approach. I want to make sure I get through all the slides. I'm sorry I get a little bit chatty at times, but just this information is so powerful to make changes in our students. But this is the strengths-based approach, and it gives you a little bit more detail here to go back and think differently as we move forward in the new school year. But one of the most important pieces of this, and that's why I want to keep moving, because I want you to hear these final pieces, is addressing the social and emotional needs of all students begins with you. You, every single one of you that are in this session. It begins with me, it begins with Melanie, it begins with Elena. If we do not take care of ourselves. If we don't understand the traumas and the experiences that have influenced who we are, we set ourselves up to be triggered with students. And so we'll go a little bit deeper in that. These are kind of reminders. These are my top 10 reminders that I share almost with every educator in several of the discussions that I do, because it's so important for you to know that kids who experience trauma aren't trying to push your buttons. They are not doing this to you. The thought is not, why are you doing this to me? The thought should be, what happened to you? What has happened to you that you feel this is the only way to respond? Different mindset. I'm not going to go through all of these, but I do want to talk about a couple of these. Something that I mentioned earlier was number 9. It's okay to ask kids point blank, but what you can do to help make it through the day, ask them. Kids want to tell you, but we don't give them the opportunity, or we use closed questions. Ask them an open-ended question that's going to give them an opportunity to say something. You can support kids with trauma even when they're outside your classroom. Building that positive relationship, being someone that they trust, being a positive adult in their life can be so beneficial to how they grow and develop and get through the difficult things that they're going through. And trauma isn't always associated with violence, although I will say, specifically in addressing our EL and immigrant populations, there is often a lot of violence that I have heard, that I have been a part of and learned and seen. And so it's there. Again, you're not going to know. You're not going to come into this knowing who has had violence in their background and who hasn't. We have to assume that everyone has had that level of trauma. So the next few slides are really about how we deal with our own traumas. Okay, remember I told you to be the very best educator that you can be for any student. We have to work on ourselves. We have to recognize and deal with things sometimes in our past that we have put away. And I promise you, this is not a therapy session, so don't get scared. But it is going to give you something to think about as we move forward towards the new school year. So the manifestation of our stress. So we always talk about the manifestation of stress and anxiety on students and how that is shown in the classroom, but we never stop and talk about what it looks like for us. So cognitively, mentally, when we have trauma, and y'all, COVID-19, I use this statement all the time. Oh, please forgive me, I had COVID brain, like COVID brain. That's what I call it, because there is so much stress constantly inundating me from COVID-19. And I'm speaking as a professional who is very regulated in my emotions, that it does impact me. Cognitively, if you've noticed memory problems or your inability to concentrate, seeing only the negative, constant worrying, you may have already had a little bit of that prior to this. But if you're noticing an increase, and again, I'm not asking you to share your story, it could be as a result of the trauma that we're being inundated with all the time. The fear of the unknown, the fact that cases continue to rise, things are not different. Everyone has to wear masks. There's so much happening, and it affects us all differently. Maybe it's not affecting you cognitively. Maybe it's pushing you more towards the emotional side of things. You could be having feelings of sadness or unhappiness, anxiety, agitation, moodiness, loneliness, and isolation. It was very difficult for me to go through the shelter in place order because I'm alone. So I spoke to dogs, for a very long time. And so that was unhealthy. And so don't feel alone if you have felt the loneliness and isolation. It is natural, and it is a manifestation of everything that is going on in our environment, and doesn't even address the personal things that you are going through. Physical and behavior, those aches and pains, if you're noticing things are hurting a little bit more, y'all, it's not just age. I know we always tend to think, oh, we're getting older and that happened. No, this is a manifestation of stress. We see it a lot in our kids, especially with like GI issues and stomach aches and headaches. Same thing for us. They just manifest a little bit differently. Behavior. Eating more or less, like I'm gonna raise my hand on that, been making some poor choices there, but it almost is soothing. It's almost soothing to do those things. Sleeping too much, withdrawing, using, substances, and kind of nervous habits and pacing. Again, this is a manifestation of the stress that we are feeling due to COVID-19, and then some, and other aspects that we don't know because those are personal. Giving yourself grace. Y'all, this is one of the hardest things that we have to try to do as educators, is to give ourselves grace, which is that permission to not be perfect all the time. We are not, and we can't be. We have to create boundaries with our time. COVID has really, really blurred those boundaries, and you found yourself working all hours of the day trying to support the work and your students. Beautiful, positive intentions, not healthy for you and your body. Letting go of computer, tablet, cell phone. We are so virtually connected through even more so now. I have to really take a break. It can be very, very addicting. It was addicting prior to this, and now it seems like I just instantly go, for my cell phone or read a story. I can't just sit quietly. And so we have to break that pattern. There's several more here. I definitely want to get through all the slides in your questions, but these are just some good ways to start taking care of you and getting you prepared to take on the challenges, because they will be larger and greater than any other year you've ever experienced going into the next school year. Celebrate your small successes every day. Sometimes my success is that I combed my hair and I know that sounds silly, but it's just, when you go in this virtual world, you're kind of like, do I really want to care enough to do that? And yes, I want to care enough to do it, and I do it, and that's a small success. And then the last thing I'm going to talk about before we get to the next slide is giving time to your children. Yes, even, in the middle of the day when we're supposed to be working, it will help your kid's educator if you can love and support and be that network of love and support and resources for your kiddo. And sometimes that means that we need to give them the love when they need it. Just think that you're helping the next teacher that takes them in the upcoming months, but that's an easy thing that we can do right now. This is just the list of some self-love practices. Again, we don't focus on ourselves enough. And if you'll notice, there might be one thing about physical activity, but y'all, self-love for me is not going for a walk. I mean, self-love for me is going for a walk. It is not exercise. Like, I don't want to go to the gym. I don't want to do anything rigorous. Like, that is not self-love. That's like self-harm. So do what feels good for you. Okay, and so there's a lot of quick little activities here for you to have an idea. I dropped in a couple of slides of mindfulness, breathing activities. Again, if you can practice breathing activities, then you can model breathing activities for your students. These are super powerful, quick, under a minute activities that you can help your students rebalance and refocus when they've gotten astray in the upcoming school year. Remember, our children will have been out of a structured environment for 6 months, half a year by the time that we go back to school, if we go back to face-to-face. That is going to be a huge transition in the sense that most students have not been, in a rigorous 8-hour day environment for half a year. So we're going to have to build in more breaks. We're going to have to use more of these mindfulness activities to get them through the day so that we can get through the day. So all of this are powerful little tools that are going to help you. We don't really talk about that piece. When we talk about transition, or as we hear it in a general sense, we talk about more of face-to-face or virtual or hybrid, but we haven't stopped to think about the mental health transition and the physical transition and how that's going to work and look like. So I'm giving you a couple of things to kind of think about so that you can be, again, proactive and not reactive. We have a little bit of time to plan and prepare there. And then just a couple more mindfulness things. Start every day with a purpose. at the beginning of COVID, where I felt like it was Groundhog's Day. Every day I was living kind of the same day. It was really bringing me down. But when I woke up and I said, today I'm going to do this. Today my goal is to complete this or focus on this or not work till 10 o'clock. Have a purposeful start to your day. Have something that you're focusing on or something that you're looking forward to. Mindful eating, mindful pause. Y'all, that's that. Let me just have a minute. Let me just take a minute. Time yourself if you need to. Mindful workout, again, however that looks to you. Mindful driving as well. Drive yourself calm, not crazy. And so again, just a few more tidbits there. These are the resources. So I made it. Oops, sorry. I do want to get to some of the chats. Sorry, let me go here. I do want to get to some of these chat questions though. Let me go back up here.
I think most of the questions I was seeing is, you guys, we will send an email following
Okay.
with the presentation, so you guys will get this.
Oh yes, sorry, absolutely. Sorry, Melanie, I couldn't keep up with everything that was happening, so I thought I saw.
But you guys feel free to use the chat box and enter your questions, and we'll address those.
Okay. Yeah, so someone is talking about, they had a student who was scared of his family having to go back to Mexico. And the only reason they told her was because of the 2 years of being his teacher and the trust belt. Absolutely. That's why trust is so important. It takes a very brave environment for a student to reveal something like that. Because like I said, the fear is real. The fear is debilitating at times. And so we want them to know that we're not taking this information and calling someone and reporting them. And that's the belief. Unfortunately, that truly is the belief. And so, sorry, I gotta get back to this chat. So yes, trust, providing that trust. Yeah, school really is their home and their escape. So we need that environment to be as positive as possible. Okay, could I mention classroom strategies to help kids feeling overwhelmed, like maybe a calm down corner? Absolutely. Something that I just taught earlier this week that really was for any educator, not just counselor, is we always have these calming corners. That seems to be very popular. We'll throw a bean bag or we'll throw a little soft carpet or a rug or something there. And, we will teach kids to go there, if they need a break. But something that I just taught was really finding that calm, safe place in your brain, in your mind. And so what that looks like is having all of your students close their eyes and think about, find that memory of one of the happiest places or a moment you felt happiest in your life. Give them some time to find it. And that way, the safe place is taught that it's within them and not a physical location. So I'm in the cafeteria and I'm upset. I'm in the gym and I'm upset. If we can model and teach our students to cope and recognize safety and love and calm can come from within, then they will take that with them wherever they go. So it's not necessarily do bean bags and things like that work great? Absolutely. But you also have to model and teach that. And sometimes we have the other side of the students that are like, why does he get to do that? It's a battle. But if everybody has their safe place or their happy place, I think happy place is more appropriate for kids, then we can all practice that. And it's something that you can model throughout the day, noticing everyone's restless or things are getting a little wild. Okay, let's find our happy place for a minute and let them calm down. Let's breathe for a minute. Give them the coping skills, model it for them.
Thank you, Sandy. That was a great presentation. So powerful and something that has been much needed for a very long time. I think that our current situation has almost been a silver lining, and I keep repeating that, but in many ways for our English learners, because so much more awareness has come about. And for years, when I would get phone calls from campuses in a panic about an English learner and what are we going to do? We have STAR, and my number one tip always has been to meet their affective needs first. Nothing else will come until we do that. And so it's for me professionally very affirming to hear, that counseling side and just amazing information. I gained so much. Elena, do you want to share your thoughts?
No, likewise. Thank you so much, Sandy, for bringing all of this to light. And to all of you that have reflected and have started to type in the chat some of your connections, how mindful do we have to be of ourselves and our students in this upcoming school year? So thank you, Sandy, for sharing everything you did with us today.
Yes, amazing. And we'll definitely, I'll definitely be reaching out to Sandy in the future to, come back and share more with us. I have a few, I know we're running behind a little bit, but I wanted to share a few resources that I've just come about learning. And this one is the Inner World Work. Lots of free resources there. Again, as we've mentioned, we'll send these things out. So if you don't catch it right now, you'll get an email with everything. Also, this is the session that I attended yesterday through Saddleback. Although it was yesterday, if you follow their YouTube channel, they will eventually post the recording. And once they do that, then I'll also post it on our English Learner support YouTube channel for Region 11 as well. So you'll have that there. But I would highly encourage you to go and check out their free webinars. They have had so many amazing webinars throughout the summer. So, I'd highly encourage you to go and check those out. I think we've gotten through most of our questions, and I'm sorry, it's so hard because there's just so much good information to share. Our next time together will be July 30th from 10 to 11. And you know what, that date is wrong. It's actually July 31st. I just realized we had made a change. We are doing a combined session again. So again, that's July 31st. I'll make that correction before I send that out. And we will do a combined bilingual ESL teacher collaborative. We will have special guests again. Our topic will really be about preparing for the 2021 school year. What is that going to look like? And hopefully by then we'll know a little more about what that'll look like. So we hope that you would join us on the 31st. Again, here are our sessions, our current EL offerings that we have for summer. And we are both, Lane and I are both working on sessions for 2021 fall and spring. Those have not posted yet, but those are to come as well. And then now is time for our poll. And the reason I do this, or we do these each time, is to really, it's a metric for us to know what we're providing. Does this meet your needs? So we can plan accordingly. So if you don't mind answering those 3 questions about how impactful today's learning was, that really guides us in knowing what to continue doing or maybe what we need to change. So you guys should be able to see the poll. Okay, perfect. So I'll leave that up there so you guys can answer those questions. And cannot thank Sandy enough for joining us today. It was just truly just such a powerful message, and just something that is really very much needed, not only during this time, but just in general. I've spent many years working with refugees, asylees, and unaccompanied minors, and that group in particular, I've seen a lot of these things that Sandy is talking about, the trauma, and it's there. And, if students are experiencing those things, the last thing on their minds is taking a science test. So just truly great, powerful message that I wish could be, shared from the rooftops with everyone. And I know, Sandy, it is your mission to do that. And you have been doing that, but it just really, we've got to do a better job as a whole, an educational community to really promote this. So anyway, thank you. Those of you who are still answering the poll, continue. I'm going to move on, but you should still be able to see the poll. This is our information. And Sandy, I apologize, I didn't include yours in there, but guys, I'll put the email in the email. I'll include Sandy's email and her Twitter handle and all that, so you can reach out to her. But this is Elena and I's information. Don't hesitate to reach out to us. as we've mentioned before, Elena's on the literacy team, and she has been amazing in collaborating with me and offering sessions for our bilingual teachers and our ESL teachers too in reading. So I know that there's a need, and in fact had a request yesterday, and that person may be on today, about doing small group instruction for our ESL students. And so something that we know their needs, and I have my long wish list of wants. Again, Sandy mentioned being a team of one is hard, but I've so appreciated having Elena's support and help in providing these services. So again, thank you for joining us. We appreciate you being here, and we hope that you continue to join us. And I would, you guys go and look at Sandy's stuff and see if there's some sessions that would be helpful to you to extend on your learning today. And Elena has a lot of sessions as well that are coming about, that bite-sized pieces for reading and literacy. So we hope that we see you again in some of our other sessions.
Thank you all. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.